and this is going to be a freewheeling conversation. We have a couple of portable microphones that I believe Celeste Licorice and Tammy Henderson are going to, Jill, we'll have the other, Jill Anderson will have the other one. Just put your hand up. I would ask you to do two things. One is, if you want to make a brief statement, make it brief. Get to your question and identify who you are, if you wouldn't mind. And if you could, direct your question to a panelist or two so that we can move through as much of the audience participation piece as we possibly can to get everybody involved. So with that, I want to make one other observation on Steve's comments about voter turnout, because as a guy who ran 6 elections in this community, one of the self-fulfilling prophecies of differential turnout is that candidates with limited time and resources, and there are a bunch of them in the room, inevitably recognize that homeowners vote at higher rates than renters. Lower income people tend to turn out at lower rates than middle or higher income people. Older voters vote at a higher level than younger, and inevitably that adds to the alienation between people who need to be part of the democratic process, both at the ballot box and thereafter. And I just think it reinforces the sense for some parts of our community that they don't have a place in our democracy and it doesn't matter anyway. And that should be troubling to all of us. So with that, I'll get off the soapbox, or at least my chair, and go ahead and ask your question. Welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Hi, my name is April Morganti, and I'm with Thrive Group. Taking my Thrive Group hat off, Dr. Tran, something you said really connected well with me, and that's something that is near and dear to my heart, and that's young women. I heard you say that the pregnancy rate had dropped by half. Do you happen to know if there are particular areas of the city where that dropped? Particularly, my interest is in hearing that it dropped in the core as opposed to some of the other areas within the city.
Thank you.
So my understanding, I haven't looked at every single FSA in terms of the level of drop, but it seems to be a consistent drop across all FSA. That doesn't mean that they've all started in the same place, right? So there's 5 FSAs.
Just for the lay people in the audience,
yeah,
FSA is?
It's basically the first 3 letters of the postal code. So there's certain areas, there's 5 of them. I mean, I can mention it if you want, but they start off at a significantly higher rate than, so this is like Hamilton, this is those specific 5 neighborhoods. They're all going down. So I think that's the good thing, is everyone is going down, and it is heartening, but we still do need to do some focused attention to those areas as well, to make sure that we want to level the playing field and reduce that gap. And it's the same as other things we're working on in the same sort of similar areas, whether they be birth weights, smoking rates, other things, and poverty. So we do know that it's fortunate that all neighborhoods are improving, but there's some that we still need to do some more work on. Thanks, April.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Juliet Daniels.
I was just wondering, has anyone actually ever asked the folks in the neighborhoods that have poor voter turnout why they're not voting? And also, has anyone considered that perhaps the hours of voting conflicts with them having 2 or 3 jobs and they're just not able to get to the polling stations? Yeah. And if that's something that we could that's something I think that's relatively easy to fix. So,
great question.
Yeah, those are great questions, and I don't know the answers to that. I know that we raised the issue of voter turnout in 2010, just before the election, and it was interesting to see that in all of the wards that we mentioned, particularly wards 2, 3, and 4, the poorest, that in the 2010 election, just a few weeks after that vital signs report, that time it was in the fall, they did go up. So I know there are, what's the group, Terry? The civic civic engagement.
Center for Civic Inclusion?
No. There's a, sorry? No. There's some group that's like for engagement of citizens, and I know they try. It's got the word league in it, something. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So there are people that look at it, but I don't know what their findings are, to be honest with you. So you've asked some great questions. I wish I knew the answers.
Yeah. And can I add? I mean, I think there are questions about technology, about online and mail voting that certainly in other jurisdictions have been promising in terms of raising turnout. Proximity to the polls. I know even from the time I was in elected office, we tended to do a really good job at putting polls in senior citizens buildings. They turned out at a higher level, but if you're on the Mac campus, there might be one polling station for 10,000 students, and it might be well removed from where they were. And that certainly plays a role. So hours of access, technology, the ability to mail in your ballot ahead of time, how many advanced polls you have. I think those are all things that we need to challenge our civic leadership on as a means of how do we get more people participating. I think it's hard to argue against the fact that to the extent we get people to the ballot box, we have a healthier democracy. I can go ahead, yeah.
As well from the diversity and inclusion piece as well. It's also important that the candidates also reflect the communities that they're running in. It's not enough. Lots of research shows that it's not quite enough for women to be running to then drive the voter turnout of women, but it is important. And it's really important also because, especially when they substantively propose policies or have platforms that speak to the issues of women or of underrepresented groups in those communities, that's also a really important way to drive voter turnout too.
Great point. Jill, go ahead.
Hi, this is a question for Ian.
Graham Meredith.
My name is Graham Meredith. I learned reading an article in the paper a couple weeks ago that I've been putting all sorts of stuff in the green bin or in the blue bin that I'm not supposed to be putting there. And I'm wondering whether the solution is at the individual level. I've been putting stuff in that have that funny triangle that says recyclable. And a whole bunch of the recyclables are not recyclable. And how do we deal with that? Is that at an individual level that we try and figure out which recyclables aren't recyclable, and or is it at the system level, forcing the vendors to stop producing and selling, not allowing the Fortinos and Sobeys to sell stuff in those products? Where's the balance there?
Well, I think that is what we need to see. Is we need to see the balance in the approaches that we have for those things. So the idea of what is typically called a producer pays policy is the idea of if I'm purchasing a product at the store right now, in terms of the cost of either throwing that in the landfill or recycling it or composting it, the consumer pays the full price, both with the cost of the product, but then also through their tax dollars, because our tax dollars go into the waste stream. But the producer of that product, they're paying taxes, but they're not paying for the price of recycling or throwing out or composting that material. And so producer pays has been around for a very long time. An old colleague of mine, Emily Alfred, who works for the Toronto Environmental Alliance, and I think still to this day is the only independent waste campaigner in the province, has been calling for this for years. And so that's one aspect of it, in that, we make these companies pay for the products that are clogging up our system, so to speak. But at the same time, the reason why we have those little triangles on these products is because they are technically recyclable. There's numbers associated with those, and you'll see it's a number 7 and number 6. So it is recyclable, but is it recyclable by the city of Hamilton? And that's not always the case. We don't have necessarily the means of, as the city of Hamilton, labeling each item as, you put this in the blue bin or not, because most of these items aren't even produced in the country. And so there's the balance of the city of Hamilton can take a step in and say, listen, we need to be working with these businesses that are purchasing these products. So an example that I have locally is the Poke Bar in Hamilton Farmers Market. I love that place. They were using the black bowls, the black plastic bowls that we now know are no longer recyclable in Hamilton. They might be recyclable in other municipalities, but they're no longer recyclable in Hamilton. We can't put them in our blue bins. And they've now switched to a compostable product, to a compostable bowl that now I can just throw in the green bin at the office when I'm done with. And that decision made by that business completely on their own is having a lasting impact in that they're no longer producing those bowls, and those bowls are no longer ending up in the landfill. But as I alluded to with the city of Vancouver, there's more that the city can be doing. And ultimately, the city of Hamilton, we can make it a lot easier on our local businesses if we start getting ahead of this, because what we're going to be seeing in the G7 conference coming up, aside from steel tariff discussions that are going to be dominating it, is the idea of plastic pollution, where you have the UK and the EU basically one-upping each other at this point in terms of how quickly they're going to ban single-use plastic products. And that includes straws, cutlery, plastic cups, things like that. And this is becoming a global problem. We're seeing, plastic waste into our oceans at a massive scale. And there's pressure internationally on Canada to start putting in pressure that will then lead from federal to provincial to municipal. So as the city of Hamilton, we can get ahead of this, just like the city of Vancouver is doing, and we can start working with businesses, trying to figure out ways that we can reduce the amount of waste that's entering our stream in the first place. And so I think that's incredibly important, because at the same time, getting to the point that Steve was making, the community of Riverdale, which is on the other side from Eastgate Plaza on Centennial, I've been working with a number of residents there on an issue of transportation. And one of the residents who's originally from Iraq, she said to me, well, what else does Environment Hamilton do other than, complaining about bus service and working with us on this? And I said, one thing that we've been paying attention to is the waste diversion. And this is a woman who's been living in Canada for 5 years. She's living in a high-rise apartment that doesn't have a compost program within the building, much like many buildings in the GTHA. And this is something that she can't think about. And at the same time, can we really be putting the individual burden on these individuals to be making sure that they're sorting their recycling properly, when there's decisions we can be making at a higher level that will make it easier for them to make those decisions?
Thank you. We'll get to everybody. So I know there are lots of hands, but there's actually a method to the madness here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Terry, you were waiting for me to heckle, and here's my heckle. I don't know who to ask to, because I don't know who the expert is on housing. I heard that the average price in Hamilton is now $500,000. That's pretty scary. Because I said what the pressure was you go to Toronto and $500,000 buys you nothing. You can come to Hamilton and have your pick. Well, now it only gets you halfway. The rent increases the last 3 years have been insane because of it. After 9 years of being stably housed, I had to try the rent market. I was fortunate enough to get a roommate where I could split, and my $500 a month is still somewhat affordable. It's now affordable that I'm on a basic income. But even a basic income does not make rents affordable when the rental market is insane. So I'd like to, whoever up there, whether it's Terry, yourself, or someone, talk about the housing and rental market, because I haven't heard it tonight yet. Thank you.
And Dave, I actually think that is, if there is a fundamental challenge facing this community right now, one is obviously segregated poverty, directly related to affordable housing. And there isn't a single bullet there, but I would say it's pretty conspicuous to me that for the better part of the last 40 years, senior levels of government have abandoned that playing field. Most of the large industrialized countries in the world recognize that there is a government role to play in providing decent affordable housing for low to moderate income people, both home ownership and rentals with subsidies and supports. And there is a long catch-up that needs to happen without a doubt. And I'll give the federal government some marks for actually putting a toe back in the water. They desperately need to be there. So does the provincial government. I also think there's a fundamental municipal role to play. As a former municipal leader, a big part of why we have segregated neighborhoods and schools is not random. It's also about how we zone property, what our official plan looks like, whether or not we embrace inclusionary zoning, whether or not we confront NIMBYism, which happens with every affordable housing project that happens outside of a couple of lower income neighborhoods in this community. And I can tell you it's going to take a concerted effort by school boards, by municipal governments, by elected officials to say there has to be a place in every neighborhood, in every community for people from across the income spectrum. If we fail to do that, we are going to fail as a community. And so that's not to point any finger of blame, but simply to say we have to rise to that challenge. So, great point. Evelyn.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Evelyn Meyer, and today I'm representing the Afro-Canadian Caribbean Association. I just want to congratulate you on the work you're doing around the vital signs to give us a pulse of what's happening in the community. Just like to recommend perhaps looking in the future, looking at the various sectors with a much more deepened equity lens. So right throughout the various theme areas, we can actually have a disaggregated data that tells us what's happening when it comes to housing and racialized people or newcomers and the like. So we have a better picture of what's really happening on the ground. So, for example, one of the things I noticed in the report, which is really good that was highlighted in the safety piece around the hate crimes. And in Hamilton, we are leading the country when it comes to the report of hate crimes in Canada. And it's really an anti-Black issue, but it's not spoken about as much. And that's something we need to, these kinds of engagements, where we flag those issues and so we can actually push policymakers and people who make decisions around those issues to bring the issue to the forefront. So I would really like to encourage, as we grow in the Vital Signs report over the years, to broaden that and embed an equity lens throughout the various sectors that you're using. And I like the Accelerator report. It's not as deep as I would like to see where racialized people are. And it's not really about visible minorities anymore. It's really, we need to talk about racialized people, because when you look at the pictures, what you're seeing are people who are not white. So to say visimin, that's a passe terminology. So I'd like us to really name it, racialized people in Hamilton, in Canada. How are we faring and how are we going to set the standard for really becoming a center of excellence around this issue? But thank you so much for the work you're doing, and I encourage you to just broaden your lens a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks for that suggestion. If you'll be patient, we'll get the microphone to you. Hop up. Oh, sorry, Samantha, go ahead.
Sorry to
Yep.
interrupt. I just want to thank you so much for your comment. And I think that it does highlight, exactly to your point, this need to put a deeper lens on things and dig deeper and to find the true state of where we're at, especially with regards to diversity and inclusion. One of the barriers that we ran into when we're doing the Accelerator report, and this is the second time we've done it, is that while we're able to collect information and data on gender and on racialized groups broadly, we weren't able to collect data and report on it for the intersection of those two. And that's a real shame. The reason we weren't able to do that is because there were so few photos or publicly available information of leaders where we could determine both their racialization status and their gender. So there were so few photos of racialized women in leadership that we weren't actually able to report on it with any validity. And that's a real problem, both in terms of our ability to name and identify problems with data and devise solutions around that and support the work that tons of women's groups and organizations are doing in Hamilton already, but it also points to a bigger legitimacy issue with some of the organizations in their reporting. It's so critical to be transparent who are constituting our leadership groups, who are actually filling these leadership positions and making decisions at the table. And so in order to start to fill that transparency gap and fill that legitimacy gap, organizations in Hamilton across every single sector really need to start publishing their metrics on this, publishing who are their leaders, and being really, really transparent about who's making these decisions.
And Terry, could I just speak to that as well? I just want to make a shout out to the work that my executive director, Linda Lukasik, is doing on PM 2.5 here in Ontario, in that, yes, air quality is getting better in Hamilton and across all sectors, but with PM 2.5, which we know there is no safe exposure rate to, the province doesn't have an adequate limit to it. What we're really seeing in the work that Linda's doing with an activist from Sarnia as well is a form of environmental racism, where the people who are most exposed to PM 2.5 and benzopyrene and things like that are racialized communities. And we're seeing that in Hamilton as well, where you end up with rich white people moving away from these key source emissions. And this happens everywhere. It's not just Hamilton, it's not just Ontario, but this, when it comes to air quality as well, it is, keenly, I want to say explicitly, it's environmental racism.
Thank you. Go right back up here.
Deb Sloboda from McMaster University. I just want to congratulate you on the report. I was really pleased to see that there are things that we can celebrate. I just wanted to, one comment and one specific question. The comment is that I like the way the report, at least online, is really nicely lay person written so that it's very understandable. But it does appear to be presented as silos. And I think much of what we're talking about is cross-sectoral, right? And we just had an example of that, how, diversity impacts on whether or not people are exposed to pollutants, whether they can recycle. Poverty impacts on whether people might get into leadership positions, or whether they have housing, or whether they have low birth weight babies, for example, right? So I think it's important that when we consider the community as a whole, that we come to the table together and talk about each part of these things as a holistic view rather than separate view. But that's just a comment. My question specifically is that despite the fact that teenage pregnancy rate is down, low birth weight seems to be going up. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. That specifically concerns me. We know that low birth weight is directly related to the risk of non-communicable diseases in those kids as they grow up in their adulthood. We see a huge rate of obesity. Those individuals usually have shorter life expectancies. They have lower quality of life. In fact, end up in fewer leadership positions. So we're back to where we started again. So we have this transgenerational transmission. So can you speak to me a little bit about the low birth weight? Right?
Sure. So this was an area that was raised a few years ago, and there was dedicated work in the city, and we are doing some focus work on it. It's the same, again, neighborhoods that are disproportionately impacted. And so there's generally like a few major buckets of issues that impact birth weights. So one is smoking, and we know that smoking during pregnancy or being exposure to secondhand smoke during pregnancy increases the risk of birth weight. So that was one of the arms in what used to be called our low birth weight strategy, now a healthy birth weight strategy. Had started being addressed starting in 2015. So one of the things we're hoping is, as we're rolling out some of the work with the healthy birth rate strategies, that over time we will actually see it ideally plateauing and going down. The second part is ensuring there's adequate prenatal care, because we also know, again, in those similar neighborhoods, a lot of young families, teenage moms, teenage parents aren't getting the prenatal care that they need. So we've engaged, because this is how collaborative leadership works, with those who have lived experiences to work with us to actually design what actual are the interventions, what programs work, what are the key messages that might resonate with that. And the third is related to teenage pregnancy and that. And I think it's something that we've got a lot of collective work across the different sectors, us, the schools, the health sector, to doing some collective effort in this. Hopefully that trend will go down. And I do appreciate the point that this is transgenerational. So one of the things I've kind of learned more recently from Dr. Sloboda is that some of the effects that we notice, whether it's obesity, nutrition, that it's not just from our generation, but if that can somehow be carried on, not transmitted per se in the traditional sense, but that can actually be imprinted on and lead to generational impact. So we do want to focus on preconception health for a number of reasons. And in terms of working together, whether it be, go back to Dave and Terry's point on things like affordable housing and rent. So we do work, and we are well aware that the social determinants of health really play an impact. So we still do reports on nutritious food basket in terms of how much does it actually cost to eat healthy. And we know that, based on, income, particularly social assistance rates, which are not very evidence-based at this point, and with the rising rent, that even after the income and just the rent alone for a single person on social assistance, you're already down the whole $100 a month if you're even trying to do to eat healthy. That's not even considering all your other expenses. And it's the same with mental health. So having the additional expenses of not being able to afford your place, worrying about whether you're going to be evicted or not, the different housing conditions is one of the reasons why we are seeing higher levels of depression and anxiety. And that's why, there's some hope if, seeing what will happen with the basic income pilot, that if, people, when they actually get the adequate, financial resources that are not like ingrained in poverty, can, lead a much more humane life.
Great, thank you, great question. I'll make one other comment, not specific to low birth weight babies, but I think the Nurse Family Partnership has showed great promise. I'm involved in a group right now that has brought together for the first time the senior people in the healthcare system, from the CEO of the LIN to the hospital CEOs, with the senior leadership in the city, including the medical officer of health and the CAO. And it strikes me, first of all, that as Donald Trump found out, healthcare is complex. Secondly, that as much as it is absolutely imperative that health and social service providers know, understand, and work collaboratively, that in many respects they don't speak the same language and haven't over the time done a great job at bridging the relationships. And I'm really seeing some promise, certainly at a senior level, that there's an understanding that hospital CEOs are not going to solve their wait time problem or emergency offload problem by simply talking about what's happening clinically within their walls. It is very much about the community partnerships and involvements of a cross-sectoral approach. And that, with a great sense of urgency, because everybody's running out of money, I think gives us some hope that there may be some innovation and greater level of collaboration than we've seen in the past. So that's really important work, in my opinion. I'm going to go back to the back. Yep.
Greetings.
Who
I have
are
a
you and
question that
what's your
could
question?
be answered by a couple.
Can I ask you just to
Oh,
tell
my
us who
name
you
is
are?
John Huslack. I'm from Ward 3. Just a question in general regarding some of the topics that were being brought up about low-income neighborhoods, environmental concerns, and so forth. What would be the city of Hamilton's opinion about employing a plastic bank like they have done in Vancouver regarding it? The plastic bank concept, I don't know if you know about it, Ian? Would be giving back, would be reducing the amount of plastics in our neighborhood, would actually be focusing on the producers themselves, treating instead of the actual the purchasers level on it. It reinvests back into microeconomics and local economics as well, if that would be the choice of the city of Hamilton. Are you familiar, Terry, with the Plastic Bank Initiative?
I'm not, no.
Are you, Ian?
I'm a little bit. Do you want to just maybe elaborate just a little bit, just to make sure I know what you're referring to?
The Plastic Bank was done with some other countries, specifically India and Haiti and so forth. But the founder, if you want to take a look into it, there's a great TED Talk on it that happened last year. Vancouver has brought the initiative into a lot of the low-income neighborhoods, and also put it into any of the high-risk environmental neighborhoods by employing community-led initiatives to bring plastic and reducing waste in their areas, but also bringing income into a convertible bank account that can be used for education purposes, reduce rates for healthy food initiatives and so forth, is then also backed by producers in the community and abroad to bring in a laptop, bring in food credits for organic food baskets and so forth. It is actually very new territory, and the organizer, I'm just trying to remember his name, because this wasn't actually the question I was going with to start.
So can I ask you to just crystallize the question then, if you could?
I actually did crystallize the question about what the City of Hamilton's initiative or idea about introducing plastic bank in or putting it onto their agenda to research it further.
Okay. Nin, you're the voice for the city of Hamilton here from a public health perspective.
So I'm not aware of that specific area. That'd be another part of the department. And certainly, overall, anything that helps with reducing plastic waste and also increases income disposability, particularly those low income, I'm supportive of, but that is something that would be out of my scope.
Okay. Can I suggest if you'll connect afterward and provide the links, I'm sure this be happy to look at it and explore the possibility. We have time here. We're at about 8:30. I'm going to suggest that we take 4 or 5 more questions, but I'm not in a hurry to bring closure to the evening if folks are still interested and engaged. So I'm going to go back to Tammy, and I know we have quite a few hands that want to get into this. Go ahead. Okay. I will ask you in the interest of time to get as many people as we can in to try and sharpen the questions if we can.
Sure. My name is Daniel Moore. I live in the East End. And my question, I think, is for Steve, probably. One thing I hear a lot of in my neighborhood is a fear that people will be pushed out of their own neighborhood, whether it's to do with housing prices or interest rates or rent or what have you. And I guess I'm kind of wondering whether you've seen that, or all 4 of you have seen that in your reading. And I guess the reason I think that might be relevant is that I wonder at times whether the vital signs that we're trying to measure are really measuring the same Hamilton that we're talking about 5 years ago. Because in that sense, it seems sometimes like an exercise in statistics to see whether a city has actually improved or whether we're talking about lives changing, we're talking about different people, or whether the city's actually stayed the same.
So on the methodology, I'm actually going to put Jeff Wingard on the spot, and then we'll toss it to Steve to make his reflections.
So thanks for the question, Daniel. Yeah, one of the limitations of the data when we look at neighborhoods is that we are actually looking at a geographic area. So if if the population, for example, were to move out of that and a whole population from Toronto with much higher incomes would move in, we would see a much different picture of the neighborhood. We know that the transitions don't always happen that fast in neighborhoods, but there certainly are some limitations in terms of doing some measurement. And I know that when we did some work with the neighborhood action strategy over the past decade or so, one of the challenges has been, the neighborhoods that we identified as priority neighborhoods, some of them have morphed, have changed so dramatically that they either might not be priority neighborhoods anymore, or there are new and emerging neighborhoods. So it is very fluid, and it does speak to one of the issues when we're looking just at particular geographies and not people.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you're raising the issue of gentrification, which is something that's top of mind here in Hamilton. Affordable real estate only lasts so long, and that's what's been attractive to people from outside of Hamilton. And so, yeah, it's a huge concern. Are we just displacing poor people? And if we are displacing poor people, are we displacing them within our community, or are we displacing them and forcing them out of our community, right? I mean, nobody wants a situation where your people of your community where you just sort of boot them down the road to the next cheapest place, off you go to Welland. I mean, here in Hamilton, we're very sensitive to that because we remember the days, we reported it in the Spectator, of Toronto when social services were downloaded to the municipalities, stories of Toronto handing people there a bus ticket to Hamilton. I mean, literally, off you go to Hamilton. And so, nobody wants to be in the position where you're now the one doing that to your, your poorer people. My sense is that there is gentrification going on with the new GO station, with rising prices in the sort of north end near the harbor front, the Pier 4 parks, et cetera. My sense is that poverty is shifting eastward in Hamilton, shifting a little bit up onto the mountain, which is unusual. And I think it's inevitable that people are being forced out of the city. The solutions to that, I don't know. Because, I mean, we've heard about rising rents. We've heard about the lack of affordable housing. We've got a collision of factors here that are dangerous, but I'm afraid I don't know what the right answer is.
Go ahead, Ian.
Just briefly, that another concern that we often hear at Environment Hamilton is people directly relate improving air quality with gentrification. And people will tell us that they don't necessarily want the air quality to get too much better because they'll see that as, no, it's true because they genuinely evaluate that as an indicator of gentrification, where if things get good enough that people will want to move here, I'll be pushed out. So that's something that we hear as well.
Great. Yep.
Hi, I'm Peter Van Dyke. I'm here as a volunteer for the YWCA, and my question might have a little bit of frustration attached to it. So you've identified tonight homelessness and women on the streets. So Denise and her team do a wonderful job identifying the need, showing the need, showing the funding, and then all of a sudden somebody will make a decision, and then this year we don't get money. And then the team has to scramble and spend all these resources to get that money. Sometimes the levels of government puzzle me, that we'll see money, maybe this time because it's the election, popping up in Burlington, where the candidate may be in trouble, just saying, yet the money might not come here where it's needed. And I'm just confused by all that. So I'm just wondering if you can maybe phase 2 of the report, how do we get money into the places that need it the most? Is there a matrix we could use where you fill out a form and say, you get the check? Thank you.
It's a great question.
As for me, I think that's a great idea. I think that's awesome. I love when smart policy decisions are backed by good evidence, so I think that's a great idea. We'll work on it. Sounds good.
Thank you. Great point. Sorry, we do have an identified system. We're going to come around and get to everybody, so go ahead.
My name's John Hawker. I live in Durand. 15 years ago, we rented there. We pay a little over $1,000. If it was renovated and rented again, it would be $1,600. Anyway, but my question is, I looked through the report, the paper report. I don't think I saw the word disabled. I'm involved with disabled committee and a seniors committee, and it wasn't mentioned. Samantha mentioned it once. Others have mentioned diversity, but disabled has not been mentioned. I think it should be.
Great point. Thank you. Yep. Okay. Where are we? Microphone runners? There are a number of questions up at the front, so I'll ask for one of the mics to come this way. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nazia, and my question is for Steve. So, as most of us know, and statistics shows us that our communities are and have become racially diverse at a significantly high rate. We also know that our communities are racially segregated in some of Hamilton neighborhoods. And we also know that the poverty rate is, and this report shows us that the poverty rate is more than double in racialized communities. Yet we are not comfortable with talking about the racialization of poverty. Why? How long and how much more time do we need to talk about openly the racialization of poverty?
Great question.
Oh, that is a great question.
Samantha, I'll put you on the spot, and then Steve, you can follow up.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think that is part of a broader trend about not wanting to talk about some of these disparities that we see. And we like to sometimes pretend that we're in a post-gender, post-racial world where these issues don't really exist. But when you put that lens on, meaning you really think about how these issues affect racialized groups or women, you really see that there's extraordinary disparities. I don't have necessarily a solution to that specifically, but speaking broadly to that issue, I think we need to name the issue continually as we do. There's tons of people, I'm sure, even in this room, who are doing incredible work in these areas. So continue to support these organizations, continue to fund these organizations, and wherever possible and appropriate, use data from stuff like the Accelerator report to substantiate and to amplify and to support this incredible work that's already being done to bring attention to this issue. It is something that we need to name and call out in order to be able able to solve and create policy and strategies around. And I think calling it out in forums like this is one of many, many ways we can do that. So thank you for bringing it up.
Steve?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add other than, data can be a powerful tool to help sharpen the focus. So, I think one of the charts that I had in my work was that something like 72% of first-generation Arabic people in Hamilton live in poverty. That should be shocking to people, and that alone should cause us to start thinking about, okay, so, there was lots of great, warm, fuzzy feelings about bringing, Syrian refugees to Canada and the flag waving at the airport, and then they come here and they're supported by church families, and that's fantastic. But then the cameras go away and those people have to live their lives, and so are we really doing enough to make sure that they not only get through the first year here, but the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, so that they're on a stable footing for a long time?
Great question. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Catherine Munn. I'm a psychiatrist from McMaster, and I just have a question. It's really a plea for another indicator, and maybe I missed it, and I'd be interested to know if the panelists have any comments on substance use and abuse disorders, and specifically opioid use disorders, which are killing a significant number of particularly youth in Hamilton, and wondering if that's been considered as an indicator or how it finds its way into the various other indicators that have been looked at this year.
Really good question, and I'll put it to...
So I know you're probably going to want to answer this, but I'm going to give a little preamble. So some people in the room know this. I don't mind sharing it, I guess. We being myself and the two researchers that I've worked with for years on Code Red, we are in the process of doing the sequel to Code Red, to the original Code Red. So it's been 10 years on from the data that we got for the original Code Red project. And so we're now assembling the data to do the sequel to say, okay, 1 decade on, where are we at? What have we done? What have we achieved? What have we not achieved? And I can tell you that, a little sneak peek, we're getting some new data this time that we didn't have the first time, and some of that data is related to the opioid addiction crisis in Hamilton and the evolution of it over time. So if you hang tight, we might be able to help you.
That's your scoop for tonight. We're, of course, embargoed. Nobody will tweet that or share it with anybody. Jeff, do you want to talk about that from a vital signs standpoint?
Thanks for the question, Catherine. It's great. We go through a fairly rigorous process when we determine the indicators for this, and we always actually want to try and include information that is relevant to everybody. And I think we've seen a lot of coverage around substance abuse and misuse and opioid crisis. And I think as we continue to evolve vital signs, we will be including stats around that as it's available. One of the challenges is that we do a pretty big vetting job on the quality of the data that we get, and we didn't find the kind of data around mental health, substance abuse, and particular kind of deaths that we would have, like opioid overdoses, that kind of thing, that we could really feel like we could include. But certainly we are working with public health to try and always improve the quality of that kind of data that we have. So, thanks.
And Nin?
Yeah, I won't answer the question in terms of why that wasn't in the vital signs report per se, because it wasn't, but I do know, certainly it's something, as a number of people are aware in the health system as well, public health, police, fire. We're doing a collective effort in terms of the addictions issue. Particularly, you have to start off somewhere in terms of opioids is clearly the main topic right now, and it's the deaths that we have to address. So right now, most of the focus, and deservedly so, because we have to buy ourselves some time, would be in terms of just preventing the deaths, the harm reduction, the supervised injection sites, the overdose prevention site. But we do know that there's a whole lot happening before that is more than that, and naloxone, that it's about access to treatment of opioid use disorders, chronic pain, and access to multidisciplinary modalities is clear, but the other underlying thing that, is something that affects so many other health factors would be mental health part. Like, people don't get to, they have a certain level of stress, because whether it's the employment rate, their financial issues, something else that pushes them towards turning, even for that brief moment, to a substance, to opioids, and then they can't get out. They're addicted. It just destroys their lives. So I think it is a broader discussion. I think right now a lot of the focus and the funding is towards one end, just to buy us time to work on the others. So it is clearly not forgotten, but we do have to get better data than just like overdose deaths. I mean, it's good to know to do certain work, but we do need a whole lot of other data before that.
Great. We're on the descent here, the last few, but the microphone's over here. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Katrina. I'm a student at Mohawk College. I'm not quite sure who to direct the question to, but it was earlier mentioned that Hamilton is experiencing sort of a renaissance of the arts. But one of the things I keep hearing, particularly from my friends who are musicians, is that there are no venues that pay musicians, that give them spots, and that big bands, local bands like Big Rec, for example, will not come back and play in this city because of how there's a lack of venue and a lack of support for musicians here. And we know how important a music scene is to a city. What are we doing to support those artists to draw in money and a nightlife to the city?
Yeah. Really great question, and I'm going to dodge because we didn't bring anybody from the Economic Development Department who could have spoken to the city's approach to supporting the music industry. It's certainly a big issue and obviously an area of real robust growth and opportunity. So thanks for the question. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to answer your question sufficiently tonight. Yep, to the back. Denise.
Hi, Denise Christopherson. I'm the CEO at the YWCA, and I want to say thank you to our biggest fan, Peter, who said something earlier. But to all of you, to you, Terry, and the team at the Community Foundation, and all the work you do to support our work and the work of other women. Steve, I remember when most recently you published about gender and by the postal code, and my staff actually ran in and posted it to my front door when I walked in my office, and they said, they're actually writing about gender, Denise. So, and to all of you, it's so important that you're actually talking about these issues, gender and inclusion, because often, as many people have talked about, we don't include that lens when we're making decisions, when we're writing the stories. And so having all of you at the forefront calling attention to these issues, we really hope that decisions that are going forward from every level, whether it's in health, we're a local community organization. I can't even go to the local, I can't apply for healthcare funding. There's something wrong with that. We can't apply to provide women's healthcare program. We fundraise to provide healthcare services for women. That's wrong. We want our Hamilton community to be healthier. We need to be investing in women and also in the broader inclusion of our diverse communities. So please keep calling it out. Please keep doing the work you're doing. It's extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Hank DeYoung, Ward 8 resident, live in Ward 8, work in Ward 3. I'm curious of the role of faith communities in all of this. We're putting a huge responsibility on government, and I'm not sure who to address the question to, whether it was identified at all in the report or what role faith communities play in dealing with some of these issues.
Really good question. Ian.
At Environment Hamilton, we work with a group called Faith in the Common Good. And right now, my colleague Beatrice Okoko is working with several different faith groups in the Beasley neighborhood to try to figure out how we can plan for climate change disasters and how faith communities come into play with that. But just more generally speaking, when it comes to issues to do with environmental issues, faith communities are the ones who show up more often than not. And it's when it comes to local environmental issues, they're also showing up quite a bit. And so when it comes to the work that I do, personally, like I'm already seeing many of our faith communities from across stepping up and trying to contribute in terms of addressing climate change local health, local air health, transportation issues, and things like that.
Because from a foundation standpoint, I think particularly in areas like affordable housing, some of our strongest partners, and I'll give a shameless shout out to Indwell here because we happen to be a financial partner with them on a number of things. And while their work is inspired by their faith, they are a nonprofit housing provider that I think do it in a remarkable way. And for us, the part of the community foundation that they tap into is not necessarily our grant stream, it's our impact investing. We are an investor looking not only for a financial return over the long time, because we think they're a pretty good bet, but also looking for a social or environmental or human rights benefit. And I think for us, when you look at an endowment of $200 million, the ability not just to grant $7 or $8 million a year, but actually then to take your capital and to place it in places that are doing great work, whether inspired by faith or not, can make a fundamental difference in communities for sure. They're a big part of our sense of partnership and inclusion in the community for sure. I'm going to take 3 more. 4? John Paul. JP, whatever you want to call yourself. Give him the mic.
Hi, my name's John Paul Danko, and I kind of have a question for everybody up there. So just to turn this upside down a little bit, were there any areas that really stood out that are doing particularly well in terms of environment and health, inclusion, economics? Like, is there anything that we can learn from those areas that might be applied across the city?
Okay, and I'll ask you to be quick in your response, but pick a high point, starting on the right. Ian.
More generally, I mean, the only growing sector of greenhouse gas emissions in the city is transportation right now. And that is, a problem that we're trying to address, but that is something that is worth celebrating.
Sam?
2 quick things. Most sectors are going up, although small, incrementally, but they are going up in terms of representation. That's good. Number 2, the youth sector actually outperforms on benchmarks, meaning it has a massive representation of women that is actually above parity, same with racialized groups. That means that extraordinary talent is being recognized, and it's shaping the way that the youth think about leadership and what leadership looks like. Really important and exciting things to come from that, I think.
Great. Ian?
So one of the things that we've had success for a number of decades would be tobacco control. And although the numbers haven't continued gone down, it's one of those less key lessons we're learning in terms of how to take more of a comprehensive approach to a number of different health issues and the importance of local healthy public policy in affecting that.
Steve Bust.
Education, post-secondary education rates continue to climb gradually. More women than men have post-secondary education completion here in Hamilton, which is great. And women's incomes as a percentage of men's continues to rise pretty steadily, so that's good news.
Okay. And the penultimate question goes to, I have a woman right up here that would have been patiently keeping her hand up.
My name is Miranda Reese, and I'm a chartered professional accountant. I'm also running for Ward 12 for City Council for Ancaster-Flamborough. My questions to you, Samantha, is the CPA Association released data about corporate leadership. And I analyzed the data, and it was revealed that only less than 10% of women were on boards. And the recommendation of that data was to mandatory appoint women to boards. But as I'm running for municipal election, that would take away our democracy. So was there recommendations in the report to say that women would have maybe free mentorship or some grants or something to help us to get our names out there and really represent women in municipal politics?
Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, the idea of quotas is certainly controversial, but there's other ways that we can work towards achieving parity and exceeding benchmarks. So certainly you can look to legislation, for example. Recently, just this past month, Bill C-25 received royal assent at the federal level. C-25 will require publicly traded corporations to report not only on the gender diversity of their boards, but also Indigenous, racialization, and LGBTQ status of individuals on their board. Person with disability. disabilities, not LGBTQ status. Really, really critical move at the federal level that will start to shape what leadership looks like. At the individual level, what we can do is people, 100%, mentorship, sponsorship. And it need not just be between senior women and junior women who want to ascend the ranks. It also can be among senior men who want to reach out and help pull people up to support growing careers and help people move also not up within organizations but across sectors. Because, for example, we see the voluntary sector has extraordinary representation of women. That's excellent. We need to figure out how strategies to pull women not out of voluntary sector, because they're doing a great job, but to also increase the number and borrow on those strategies that are helping women achieve those levels in voluntary sector and help them also achieve success in other sectors as well.
Great. And I think we're going to close off the questions. I'm going to ask the panelists each to take about 30 or 45 seconds to make a personal observation on what each of us might think about doing to make a positive contribution to the areas they've spoken to tonight, and then I will provide some concluding remarks and we'll get you home safely on time. Let's go from right to left.
So yeah, just on the topic of waste collection, we have a municipal election coming up. We have the Waste Free Ontario Act that's coming through, but I mean, I'm seeing candidates in the room right now that could all be waste champions. And the more people who are asking local candidates about what they want to see happen in terms of waste reduction in the city, it'll become an election issue, just like how anything else will. And then we can actually work on it with the new council after October.
Thank you.
So I want to echo some of the comments that we heard earlier and repeat two good news stories, that incrementally representation's improving and the youth are showing extraordinary promise in that sector. But it's too slow and we can't wait for 14-year-olds to ascend to the ranks of senior leaders before we reach parity. So what we need to do is look to the organizations that are driving this change every day and invest heavily in them. To echo the point that we heard earlier, I don't know the number, but I'm sure it's a very large percentage of budgets of organizations that serve women is spent getting more budget, spent looking for more money, looking for more funds to fund the programs that serve women in Hamilton. And it's every woman in Hamilton either personally or knows someone who is supported and affected by these organizations. They cross sectors, whether it be health, transportation, or social enterprise. Organizations that serve women serve the whole community and need strong investment and strong support from everyone across Hamilton.
All right, so from a health perspective, on an individual family level, just pick something sort of reasonable, let's say for physical activity. If it's short enough, walk, cycle, take public transportation. If you can, take the stairs. But from a broader impact in public policy, we have 2 elections come up. There are issues that, when you think of health, think of more than just healthcare, right? Think about the determinants. Think about what sort of policies, regardless of what party you're going to vote for, that will improve access to child care, provide access to dental care, is going to address affordable housing, basic income, or adequate social assistance rates. So I think that's the biggest, thing we can do out for our community.
Thank you. And the last word?
Oh, right. Like you're not going to speak again.
Not for more than 45 minutes.
Run! So as the person who created this living laboratory called Code Red, which I'm sure people are just sick to death of, and I understand that. One of the things that I think slapped a lot of people in the face, was a wake-up call to a lot of people, myself included, at the time that we did it, was that we live in this community, and we know that there are differences across this community, but I don't think anyone realized just how great these differences were across the community, in people's social situations, in people's income, and most importantly, people's health. And 10 years on, I can tell you that the social and the economic indicators across this city, when you break the city into little parts, are no better than they were 10 years ago. And that's frightening. And I think if anything to take away from this, it's to think about how we can make this community more integrated and not so segregated.
Great point to finish on. Can I ask you to join me in thanking our panel, not just for the thoughtful presentations tonight, but for all the work they do to make this community stronger and better. And now I'm going to disappoint my friend Steve Bust and simply recognize all of the folks who have helped make this Vital Signs launch such a success, our partners at the SPEC, the team of volunteers that provided oversight, our staff leadership, Grace Diffie and Michael, to Tracy Varco and Alan and Yelena and Morag and Tammy and Celeste and Jill, and to the others who make me proud every day to get up and be part of a team of people who really are driven to do good things and to build a stronger and better Hamilton. This is the starting point and not the end point of a conversation. We have to hold power to account. We have to inform the conversation so that the evidence makes a difference. And then we collectively have to do what you've been part of tonight, which is to use your voice and your presence and your passion to continue to make momentum and build trust in the things that matter in this community. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being a part of it. We hope you'll come back and be part of this in the future with us. Have a good night. Drive safely.